All the ladies understand, yeah, so.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Awesome. See, you got to look out for each other.
Absolutely.
So what do you focus on last week here, basically, in terms of making the most of what's left of this campaign?
Well, for us, it is all hands on deck now. We are excited to continue to share our message. Obviously, with a week left, we've been focusing a lot of our efforts on getting people actually out to the polls. We believe that we have probably the strongest message in this campaign and a lot of enthusiasm and energy. So our goal is to harness that. I think tonight's forum was very helpful because it allowed me to be able to go more in depth on the issues that Chicagoans actually care about. And I think that will sway some of the undecided voters.
So 4 years ago, there was almost a record low turnout. You've said that low turnout favors establishment candidates. Are you seeing any signs of anything different this time in terms of registering new voters or any kind of tea leaves in that front?
Well, I think our approach as a campaign has been different. It hasn't been the traditional way of engaging voters. We've been really intentional about spending a lot of time in neighborhoods, doing more creative events that will attract people who don't typically participate in the process. We've seen actually a lot of people who we've brought into the process that said that they've never voted or never bothered to vote because they didn't believe in it. And so our campaign is leading by example. And so we're seeing a level of enthusiasm about our campaign that, quite frankly, is different from what we're hearing about the rest of the field and the overall mayoral election cycle, where there's 20% undecided voters. But for us, we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm because our message of not being the establishment, not being tied to the machine, having a strong vision for Chicagoans that is inclusive and that is actually a plan for how we can have the kind of city that we deserve, and targeting not just traditional voters, but feeling that everyone deserves to hear this message and be a part of that. That's what's, I think, creating the enthusiasm. So we hope that it will be enough to drive up turnout in this election, even if the numbers are a little slow at this point.
Mar, do you think that the fact that you're a millennial and you're not a part of the establishment, which you say is corrupt, is that more important than any of the substantive issues, whether it's pensions, whether it's education, whether it's violence, neighborhood economic development? Does it, in your view, if you win, it's because you're change, not those four issues?
I think it's not only being the change, but also having a specific plan for how we're going to address our pensions, how we're going to generate revenue, how we're actually going to address violence and the issues of education in Chicago. What people want to hear, whether they're millennials or our seniors, is do we have the kind of city where they can be safe, they can work, and they can have a high quality of life? So what we saw in the midterms was that millennials did come out to vote in record numbers, but what we're experiencing on the trail is that people are attracted to our strategic plan for addressing those very issues that you raised, and that's what's creating the groundswell of support that we have.
Did you get a chance to stake out your positions tonight, or if not, could you do it in the next minute?
Well, so we addressed a few of the issues. I mean, if we could talk about it all day, I wish we could have gone a little bit longer on the issues of finance and really the root causes of violence in Chicago, which I don't think get enough attention.
What are the root causes?
It's the lack of investment in many things across the board. We just released an environmental justice plan yesterday that talks about exposure to public health hazards in communities. It's the lack of economic investment in neighborhoods. It's the dismantling of public health and mental health infrastructure. These are the things that actually cause violence to manifest. And we spent a lot of time talking about police and police infrastructure, but as a city, we have not addressed the root causes, and our campaign is really pushing that to the forefront.
So what issue do you think is going to motivate the new voter, the young voter, the first-time voter?
Well, so what we've been hearing, again, with our campaign is, one, we are not tied to the machine. We are not tied to the baggage of corruption. We are not tied to the establishment. But what I do have is the kind of experience that shows a fundamental understanding of the systems that govern people's lives and how they need to be changed in very specific ways. People are looking not just for anything different. They're looking for a vision that's inclusive and a vision that's specific enough to show them how the city can be better under new leadership. So it's not just new leadership, it's better leadership. And again, that message is resonating definitely with millennials and younger voters, but it's certainly resonating also with older voters across the city.
Ken Griffin's kicked in $2 million for Bill Daley, SEIU's well over $1.5 million for Tony Preckwinkle. I'm sure you'd love to have that kind of money to get on TV in more of a way that you just haven't. What have you learned about stretching a campaign budget here during this race?
Well, I have learned a lot. I think on a personal note, just because of my background and financial background, we really learned how to make dollars stretch. Many people across the city learn to make dollars stretch as they try to afford to live in this city. And so those same principles influence how we've been able to operate so successfully as a campaign. We have been very creative. We have employed many innovative solutions that even the most well-funded campaigns have not been able to do.
Like what?
The kinds of events where we attract voters. I mean, we haven't stuck to just being up on television. We host parties. We host meet and greets. We've hosted town halls that are not connected to forums. We've hosted petition parties. We engage the small business community in very active ways, not only to help us get on the ballot, but also to help us get our message out. And so not having access to millions of dollars has forced us to be extremely creative, but that creativity has created a campaign that's very attractive, it's attractive to traditional voters, but it's especially attractive to those who have not really participated in the process. And I think that's leading to the kind of enthusiasm that, quite honestly, you can't pay for. That's an advantage that I think we have.
What's your solution to the $80 billion pension hole for the city?
So we've talked about
$80 billion.
So there are short-term solutions, especially with the on-ramp, and then there are long-term solutions. In the short term, we address many of them in the forum that just ended.
Let's go to long-term.
But the long-term requires us to restructure the fundamentals of our economy. We have to address whether people are able to work with jobs that can sustain individuals. We have to address what's happening with the small business community and the fact that we have created these multi-billion-dollar incentive packages for large corporations, but we're not even doing the same for the small business sector, which is much larger and actually generates so much more revenue for the city. We've got to restructure our property tax assessment system where we're taking into account sales tax revenue that we're not capturing because we haven't realized what's happening with Amazon and other warehousing. That's the future of the economy, and we're not thinking about it. We also have to be able to fund our own infrastructure. The city needs its own banks, so we're not wasting all of our money with private financial institutions and high interest rates and bad bank deals. These are the sorts of structural changes that we're proposing in our economic plan that are not, that will actually address the long-term revenue needs and stability that the city needs. This is part of why our campaign has been attractive.
Do the millennials care about that?
They do, actually.
Really?
They certainly do, because they're saddled with student loan debt. A study out of University of Chicago just showed that 1 in 3 millennials don't even see a future in the city. And that's scary when you think about these are our future property tax payers. We need them to care, and they do. What they have not had is leadership that actually takes into account their voices and leadership that recognizes that this has to be a city for all of us, not just for a few.
Amara, why should people vote for you? What make you stand out better than all the other candidates that's running?
Well, I'll say the same thing that I said during the forum. I have the broadest horizontal policy experience, understanding all of the systems that govern our lives, everything from economic development to housing, food security, violence prevention, because I've worked in all of those policy areas. Vertically, I also have the experience understanding the top level of government, but also being a grassroots organizer. We have a huge disconnect between those who make policy and those who are affected by policy, and that's why you're seeing the discontent and, quite frankly, the city's population declining precipitously. We have to have a mayor that is not just focused on one particular area. You have to understand how all of these areas, these systems intersect. And you also can't just be focused on a top-down approach. We have to have a bottom-up approach that actually understands the lived experience of Chicagoans and neighborhoods across the city. There has to be an equity agenda. We have to be much more responsible, and those are the things that our campaign offers, and not being tied to the machine or the establishment, which has created the current circumstances that we're experiencing.
Dr. Ayer, I don't want to put you on the spot, but my name is Wale Idris, the publisher of Africa US Today magazine. Sure. I don't want to put you or Mr. Gary McCarthy on the spot, but at the Interfaith Church about 3 weeks ago, I asked him, will he consider endorsing Amara? He did not hesitate to say yes. Surprisingly, tonight, he said the same thing. So what about you? If he comes to run off, would you consider? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Well, so it's the same response, and I've had the pleasure of being able to meet Gary more in depth throughout the course of this campaign, and I certainly appreciate his generosity. I think for me the most important criteria for anyone that we would support or that I would support is whether or not they had the courage and conviction to run for mayor prior to Rahm Emanuel deciding that he was not going to run again. What that shows is and Gary was one of the he was one of the candidates that actually came out
So you
prior
take
to
that over policy, even though you might have a more progressive candidate in your definition in the race who got in afterwards. What's more important?
Well, it's not one or the other. I think having the conviction, if you didn't believe that the current circumstances were egregious enough to where you need to step up, then it's hard for me to believe that you are just as convinced that those same things need to be changed after the mayor left. And what I found is that there are, with all of the individuals that we've been campaigning for months now, there are many things upon which we agree. And I think that finding those areas of commonality and the things we can build upon is actually productive.
Omar, I don't think Laquan McDonald was mentioned once tonight.
Yep.
Was that the moderator's fault? Was that the candidate's fault? Should a forum for an hour go on without mentioning what happened with Laquan McDonald and what it means? Is there nothing? Did you think that was bothersome to you?
Well, I certainly can't speak to the planning of the questions for tonight. I think that the Laquan McDonald case is such a groundbreaking case in the direction that the city is going now. For me, a lot of the issues that we're talking about as relates to police accountability even existed before the Laquan McDonald case. And so what's important to me is who was willing to speak up on the issues of police accountability before 2015, before 2016, who actually worked in communities on these issues, worked with community members on these issues prior to Laquan McDonald, and how can we trust the judgment moving forward? We've talked about it in many forums, and I think I have a good sense of where the other candidates stand, but it's something that's always at the forefront of my mind, even if it doesn't get directly addressed in a forum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. In front of Gary.
But you were here first.
Yeah. Is this yours?
That's just recording.
LaShawn Ford, State Representative of the 8th District. I want to first thank Chicago Tonight and City Club for hosting this event. It was a great opportunity for me, a candidate, to come out and speak to the voters. This election for me is about grassroots movement and doing everything that we can to bring racial healing in the city of Chicago. It's so very important that the city of Chicago find a way to come together and end the racism, the discrimination, and also the machine politics. From 2006, I was elected because I beat the machine. And I continue to be an independent Democrat to work on issues like restorative justice, health care, and education, and things like that to improve the quality of life for people across the state. So I'm excited that our grassroots movement has a 98% campaign volunteer leadership that's not paid, and they work morning to night to make sure that our message gets out, and we knock on doors to make sure that the voters know that they have someone that's going to stand up for everyday working people in this election. It's been a long time since the city of Chicago could say that they've had 14 candidates, but it's very important to know that right now Chicago has a candidate with a track record of standing up for restorative justice and social justice issues. There's not another candidate in the race that could say that they've protected the reentry community. There's not another candidate that could say that they've supported the LGBT community by votes. There's not another candidate in the race that could say they voted to protect women's rights. My record speaks for itself, and it proves that I am a representative that stands for social justice in Chicago.
Grassroots are great, but it takes money off and you get your message out in a city as big as Chicago. Has that been a struggle in raising money, or why hasn't that come to fruition for you?
Yeah, it's definitely been a struggle. I mean, but raising money in Chicago is not easy for anyone but people that have ties with long-term relationships in the business community. It's easy for a person like Daley to raise $1 million by making one phone call. I mean, it's hard to catch that. But I think that people have to recognize that their votes are not to be bought, that their vote is powerful, and they should vote their interests. And that's why we're in the race, to give the people in Chicago an opportunity to vote their interests. I don't know how many people in Chicago would be voting their interests if they vote for someone that's could call one person and raise $2 million.
LaShawn, if Daley or Preckwinkle or Mendoza or Chico wins, the so-called Burke Four, does that mean that nothing changes about pay to play, the Chicago machine, the corruption? It's over. That is all of what you've been talking about, corruption. If the Burke Four wins, it's just more of the same? Is that what you think?
I think that it'll be a disappointment if we have more of the same, but I think that the voters are going to examine the candidates that's in this race right now, and they have a right to vote for who they choose. And at the end of the day, we will have to work with whoever is the mayor if it's not us.
Can you elaborate on your experience that caused you to decide to run in this race?
Well, 12 years of experience dealing with budgets in Springfield has not been easy, and most recently dealing with the past governor, Bruce Rauner. We had some trying times in Springfield, and as a member of the Appropriations Committee for K through 12, a member of the Appropriations Committee for Human Services, one of the largest budgets in the state's budget, I have the experience to deal with budgets. I also have the experience of working with my own business and making sure that I'm able to balance my own budget and my own business. You know, it's not easy dealing with taxpayer dollars, but you have to make sure that you treat taxpayer dollars with respect, and you have to do what's necessary. And what we have failed to do in Chicago for so long is to take care of the people that need the help the most.
Is this election about CPS rapes and Laquan McDonald? And if the moderator chose not to make it about that, why didn't you or one of the other candidates?
Well, I didn't speak of Laquan McDonald directly, but I did speak about the racism in the police department and how many black people have been shot. So I did speak to it. I think Laquan McDonald is one of many. And my overall message is that Chicago must heal, and the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we have a mayor that's going to stand up and demand that we have fairness in this city.
What about the CPS rapes? Did you mention that?
I did not mention that.
It's not important? Why?
It's very important, but you know what? You have minutes to answer questions, and Jeff, you know that being respectful of the moderator, you're going to do everything you can.
What would you say now about CPS rapes?
I think that I would say that I've been working on this with ISB, the state board, and we're going to continue to monitor the CPS, and we're going to put pressure on them to have reforms in Chicago public schools to protect the students.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I just want to actually start by complimenting Carol Marine, and I don't know if you all know it, but she and I have gone toe-to-toe a couple of times. I thought she did a phenomenal job tonight, controlling the tempo and keeping us all in order, which is sometimes difficult to do because it could be like herding cats. I think it was a good forum. A lot of things were discussed. We covered a lot of ground and realized that we've done this probably 20 or 30 times together. I think we could give each other's answers to any given question that you were going to ask us. So I think that it was well done tonight, and my compliments to WTTW and the City Club.
What do you have to say about Laquan McDonald and CPS rapes?
So first of all, I did a press conference on CPS rapes, and none of you chose to come. So why are you asking me that now?
Well, now's your chance.
No, I already had my chance, and I talked about it. There's been 1,200 allegations of rapes since 1980, since 2000. And I also laid out a whole series of reforms that need to happen. They shouldn't be internally investigating criminal complaints. They should go right to the police. I very clearly articulated that. And Laquan McDonald, I've explained 10, 20, 30 times over.
Do you have any responsibility for what happened that night?
The cover-up happened in City Hall.
Not the cover-up, the actual incident.
You asked me the question. You want me to answer it?
Yes.
Okay, then let me answer it, okay? So the cover-up happened in City Hall. My role in it was very simple. I could take one action and put that officer on paid desk duty, which is exactly what I did. Wasn't in charge of the discipline system, I made recommendations to the police board, which actually, when Laurie got there, got a lot better. Because before she was there, they overturned 75% of my termination recommendations of police officers. And then you want to know why we have a problem in the police department. Wasn't in charge of the investigation, that was IPRA. Now it's COPA. I took one action that I was allowed to do by law, and it's that simple. I asked for the state attorney general to do an investigation into this particular incident, because at this point, it's fruitless for me to talk about it, because I've talked about it 100 times over.
Gary, where do you think your base is in this race as we hit the stretch here?
Bill, it kind of spreads out. We're finding that it's in a number of places that you would expect it to be, like the southwest side and the northwest side. We find it among city workers. But the thing that's really amazing to me, we spent probably an hour today shaking hands in the pedway. And almost without exception, probably 70% of the people who shook my hand were African American. And I think people are going to be surprised by that, because it's generally politicians who have given me a problem. It's not the people who live in the city. And that's something that I've been talking about since I got here.
So how would you handle racism in the police department as mayor?
Well, we've already talked about this also. We've talked about this over and over again. We had the most, the legitimacy training that we created in the department was created by Tracy Mears and Tom Tyler, the godfather and the godmother of police legitimacy. And that actual training knocked down complaints against our officers significantly. In the end, departments were coming from across the country to learn from us and take that training back to their departments. So there's steps that can be taken. Beat integrity is a big one, so that officers have the exposure to the same community over and over again and get to know the 5 kids who are coming from basketball practice versus the 5 kids who are always standing on the other corner. There's a whole series of things that we can do.
What will you do as mayor about the Chicago Police Department compared to what you did with the police department when you were superintendent?
Well, I think the heart of your question is, will I be able to not micromanage it? And my answer is, I believe so. Having been micromanaged before and having had latitude to do what I needed to do before, it's much easier to have the latitude. I would make sure that the person who I select as the superintendent would be the best in the country, period. And without consideration to their race. It would be the best person in the country, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, you name it. And I would have the confidence in that person to let them go and handle it. Give them the resources, hold them accountable, which, by the way, is the business practice that we're not accustomed to here. We want to hold people accountable, but not give them the resources or the authority to do things they need to do.
Your approach would be not to micromanage the police superintendent, yet to give the superintendent the resources needed to run the department.
Absolutely, and the latitude. It's more important to have the latitude than the resources. Every police chief in the country complains about resources. It's more important to be able to do more with less, which is what we did during my tenure. The head count is at the highest head count it's been in 10 years. So this whole issue of filling up the ranks, you know, that's nonsense. Whoever's telling you that is lying. The second thing is there's more detectives now than over the last 10 years than one particular year, and it was 9 years ago. So the ranks are full. That's not the problem. The problem is the supervision, the morale, and the direction of the department.
What's your long-run
You got in
solution?
this race almost a year ago.
Yeah.
In March.
Yeah.
How frustrating has it been to start off with a platform and a good amount of media attention and go to a race with just 14 candidates, and it's hard to get your message through? And what strategy have you learned about conveying a message in such a crowded field these last
Are you
months?
reading my diary, Bill? The fact is, it's been very, very difficult. And you know, I don't want to quote what Laurie said about you guys covering the race, but it hasn't been exactly fair. Let's put it that way. It's quite apparent that everybody's enamored with a couple of candidates. And like Laurie, myself, and a couple of others, Amara, we've been here since before everybody else jumped in. And what I'm really curious about is, why isn't anybody holding those candidates accountable for the fact that suddenly now they're lifelong Chicagoans, they love Chicago, they have all the answers, they have all the policies. Well, did they have all of that in August, or did they only gain that in September? And I don't think that the field has been level. The structure here, start with the February election. right? We know what that's all about. So that the low voter turnout can be tilted by the machine bringing in their people. That's first of all. Second of all, the petitions. 12,500 signatures to get on the ballot to run for mayor, but you only need 5,000 if you're running for governor. What? And then the campaign reform has to happen. People shouldn't be able to take in millions of dollars from unions and special interests. Simply not fair. If we want to continue what's happening in Chicago, then keep using this process, because you're going to get what the system is going to produce. And we've seen it for decades. So it's been very frustrating, but the strategy that I'm using is we're talking to people all across the city, small groups, big groups, and we're getting our message out that way, and it's resonating.
And cable TV seems to be something in particular for you.
Yeah, cable is going really well. Sometimes speaking Spanish on cable goes a long way also, which sometimes causes a controversy. I'm not sure if you heard about Orchard Heights, where a guy tried to shut me down while I was speaking Spanish to a Hispanic community, which kind of led to some people getting pretty upset. But the bottom line is talking to people and getting our message out. Bill, honestly, I've been here 8 years. I've been in the public light 7 of them, right? I was off the radar for that 1 year. Over the last 8 years, it's very difficult. I learned early on to get a message out through the media. And I've honestly seen some stories where, I say the sky is blue, and they'll see an article that says, Gary, you're wrong. It's not. It's purple, or whatever is happening. So it's very clear that, it's not a fair race. And unfortunately, elections have consequences. We're going to see how it turns out. We're still very confident. The reason why there's so many people who are undecided is because they've seen Chicago elections and government for God knows how long, however long they've been alive. And it's failing, and they know that. So there's still, I believe that those 4 individuals that everybody loves to talk about are not going to be receiving the votes from those undecided, that they're going to be spread among other candidates, and that's what's going to decide this election. It's within reach for probably 8 of us, quite frankly.
What's your solution to the long-run city of Chicago pension hole that some put at $70 to $80 billion?
The short answer is we have to have budgets that mean something. We have to stop borrowing to pay our debt. And we have to stop political spending and start doing needs-based spending here. We need to generate new revenue, and the way we could do that by reinvesting in the neighborhoods, using TIF funding the way it's supposed to be used, not the way that we've been using it, which I believe is actually illegal, but God forbid somebody investigate that. Block 37 is not a blighted neighborhood. I don't know if anybody noticed. Neither is Navy Pier. So that reinvestment, all the things that we've been talking about, and if you listen to most of us, we're saying very similar things. We need the education system. We need a long-term plan for our education. We need reinvestment in small businesses across the city. We need to bring back trade and vocational schools, which, by the way, you were at the press conference when I unveiled that back in June, I believe it was, as the school year ended. So these are the things that we all know that need to be done. But at the end of the day, it's going to take some leadership, and it's going to take some hard choices as we get down the road and we see just how much of a revenue problem we have versus how much of a spending problem we actually have.
Do you think the great majority of the police will vote for you?
I don't know. You would have to ask them.
You have no idea?
I think that they would, my feeling is yes. The bottom line is I've walked in their shoes. I was out there with them. They were with me when I was making gun arrests. I was with them. So if they don't see the leadership, I can't do much about that. Everybody has alliances here in this place that go back decades. I've heard that over and over and over again. So maybe yes, maybe no. Yes, sir.
Difference, person. Go ahead. Go for it.
I'm a member of Moody Church in Chicago, and on Sunday afternoon, your name came up very frequently at the Moody Church.
I hope in a good way.
In a good way.
Okay, good.
Because I asked my pastors, I said, why you want to vote for Gary McCarthy? But one of the pastors, as a matter of fact, his name is same as your last name, McCarthy. He said, because you are the only candidate that eloquently express what you want to do if you win. Normally, politicians, they don't tell you what they want to do, but you always, very eloquent about what you're going to do if you win. And knowing that Paul Wallace and Tony Prenwick were front runners right now, what can you do? What gives you assurance that, yes, you know what you want to do and you will do Politicians, they don't tell you what they want to do, but you telling everybody what you're going to do.
Well,
Don't give that assurance.
that's my personality. You know, I'm kind of a what you see is what you get type of person. I wear my heart on my sleeve. You know when I'm annoyed. You know when I'm happy. You know when I'm having a good time. And I tell you what I think. I'm not going to lie. That's the other thing. My integrity is the most important thing to me. So I'm not going to tell people what they want to hear. I'm going to tell people what I think is the right thing. And that's what I'm going to pursue. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's the character that my parents gave me.
What differentiates you in this crowded field?
Again, like I said, 35 years of public service, not politics. 17 years at the top of city government in 3 major cities in this country. I worked for a plethora of different mayors, right? I worked for Giuliani, I worked for Bloomberg, I worked for Cory Booker, and I worked for Rahm Emanuel. So in those 17 years, I've learned a lot about management. I've been a manager since 1985. I've managed very large, diverse organizations, and I pride myself on my management and leadership skills. And I think that's what Chicago needs. We need straight talk, we need leadership, we need tough leadership, and we need management all at the same time.
If elected mayor, what will be your #1 priority if you are elected?
So here's the best way to answer that. The #1 issue in the city, all the polling, and I think practically everybody knows this, is gun violence. But we can't fix anything in this government until we get legitimate in government. Everybody expects to be lied to in Chicago. And people tell me it's never going to change. It's always going to be that way. And I say it's only going to be that way if somebody doesn't change it. That's when it'll change. So the process by which we can fix the city has to do with ending the corruption and business management of city government. The #1 issue is to reduce the gun violence. But everything is related. The gun violence is related to the taxes and the economy and the schools and affordable housing. People are leaving the city because they're leaving the city because of gun violence and high taxes. Because they're leaving the city, we all have to pay more taxes. Because they're leaving the city, we're losing our tax base. Because we're losing our tax base, we're closing schools and pulling social services from the neighborhoods that need it the most, which is causing more gun violence. So they're all interrelated. We have to have a holistic plan from the top that addresses all of that. We need to cut down on the bloated city government that we have. There's going to be cost savings in ending the corruption by itself, but by the same token, efficient management of those resources, which is something that hasn't happened here in decades. We do everything politically. We don't do it because it's the best thing to do as far as management and managing the resources that we have. That was a long answer to a very short question. They're all interrelated. #1 is the corruption and the gun violence.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Lori, it's all yours.
So my name is not Tony Preckwinkle, and I will actually answer your questions.
Speaking of which, that was an unusual move to put out a joint statement with Mendoza today about President Preckwinkle. What was the genesis of that, and why did you think that was important to do?
Look, I think that there are a number of serious issues, but certainly the fact that women still face challenges in the workplace by men who do not respect them, by men who sexually harass or worse, assault them. And when you're a leader, you have to understand that that continues to be an issue, and you have to lead. And if you look at the various iterations of the story that I still don't think we've gotten to the bottom of Tony Preckwinkle's former chief of staff, John Keller, when the timing of the allegations came to her, what she was notified of. Do you need some water, sir? When those allegations came to her, the fact that she frankly failed to tell the truth about them over and over again is an issue that voters need to remember and not forget. And anybody who calls themselves a progressive, anybody who's hosting a fundraiser now saying, be fair to Tony, be fair to the women in the workplace and lead and take their complaints about sexual harassment or sexual violence much more seriously. Tony's failed on every measure on that issue when she had the opportunity to lead, and I think it was important for us to remind the people that that is her track record.
So how did the joint statement come about? Whose idea was that?
Well, there are always conversations that go on back and forth between campaigns. What's most important is we stood up, we highlighted the issue, and I think drew a very sharp contrast between ourselves and Tony Preckwinkle.
What does it be fair to Tony? What do you think that even means? What is is not-
who,
what is not
who
been fair?
knows what that means? For somebody who has presided over a corrupt, broken political machine, who aspired to climb to the top of that ladder, who protected a guy like Joe Barrios, who frankly, even before that, had Tony Resco in her back pocket as her finance chair for years and years, and who clearly had a relationship with Ed Burke, so she was so comfortable that she hired his kid, and then lied about the relationship. Who knows what that means? What I would say to Toni Preckwinkle, be fair to taxpayers. This is a woman who's raised taxes over and over again, whether it's a sales tax or the failed soda tax. I think she needs to be fair to homeowners and stop shielding Joe Barrios and stand up and say, for once and for all, which she's never done, that the property tax system is broken and rigged, and it happened on her watch with Joe Barrios. And she needs to be fair to women and be fair to people in the city who want an open and transparent government that she clearly is not comfortable with. She's proposing all these ethical changes. If you really believe that, Toni Preckwinkle, do it now at the county. She failed to lead.
Lori, was there enough discussion in this election contest about Laquan McDonald, not the cover-up, but the actual incident, the 16 shots in 6 seconds, the lack of more tasers, the lack of an effective early detection system so somebody could ferret out Jason Van Dyke? Who was culpable? I mean, is it just Jason Van Dyke, or was there something greater that should have been discussed here?
Look, I think the prosecution of the 3 officers, even with the acquittal, highlight the fact that while there has been some progress that's been made, there's a lot more that needs to be done. I led the Police Accountability Task Force. We laid out a series of findings and recommendations about what needs to happen. That obviously came in the wake of the murder of Laquan McDonald, the suppression of the videotape. So look, there's a lot more that needs to be done, and frankly, there's nobody who's led more on police reform and accountability than I have. There's no one more prepared than me as to take over and make sure that we get everything done on police reform and accountability than I am from day one. I don't need a learning curve. I've been leading on this issue for a number of years.
What was the one issue that motivated you to run?
Well, I can't say that there was one issue, but frankly, as a kid who grew up in a low-income family, looking across the city and seeing so many people who look like me, growing up in families like mine, and knowing that they were struggling, and that frankly this current administration frankly didn't see them, that there was no plan to uplift the quality of the neighborhoods that they were living in. There was no plan to make sure that there were real jobs and opportunities in those neighborhoods, that we were going to solve the food, the pharmacy, the health care, the mental health care deserts that permeate so many neighborhoods across the South and the West Side. I knew that as a city, as great as we are, with the prosperity that we have, that we could do better. And so after a lot of thought and prayer and consultation with my spouse, I just decided to jump into the fray.
So we've got $2 million in from Ken Griffin. SEIU's praying for a couple million by now. What have you learned about running your campaign on the budget that you've had available and maximizing the resources you've had? And what do you find frustrating about such large checks?
Well, I mean, I think, frankly, what I find interesting is all these millions of dollars are being poured in, and yet the voters want somebody different. And I think the fact that our campaign is surging at this opportune time, that we're going to, I think, take off a lot of that undecided vote, says to me that voters are understanding that they actually have the opportunity to vote their values, vote for change, and they're not being succumbed to the airbrush version of the 30-second ads that they're seeing from the Burke 4 and some of these other candidates. People in the city are going to have an opportunity for real choice for the first time since 1986 when Harold Washington ran the second time. And what I've been saying to folks is, don't squander your shot. Take advantage of this opportunity. Vote your values a week from today. And I expect to have great results on Tuesday night.
It doesn't seem like undecideds are going to go to in heavy numbers to Tony or Bill Daley because they have their minds made up on those folks.
I think that's right.
And so when it comes to maximizing your share of that, without the resources, how do you execute that?
Well, look, I think we're doing fine with the resources that we have. We've been very fortunate, frankly, since the Sun-Times endorsement. We've seen a huge upswing in interest in our campaign, whether it's traffic to our website, whether it's the number of donors that we've received low and medium and high donors. And frankly, just anecdotally, people sending us messages through Facebook or email saying, I voted for you. This was the penultimate decision. It really tipped it in my favor. I mean, just in the last 24 hours, I can't tell you the number of people who reached out to us and said, standing tall against a machine, one of Tony's minions, that's what sold me on you. We know that you're going to be a leader who can handle the tough fights that are ahead, that's going to stand for us. So I feel like we're doing a very good job of getting our message out at an important time when people are really starting to tune in to this election and recognizing this is the election of our lifetime.
McCarthy stated that basically he was limited in what he could do about the Laquan McDonald situation, that the cover-up was in City Hall. What is your assessment of the power that the police superintendent had at that time to address the Laquan McDonald shooting?
Well, look, I think one of the most insidious things about the shooting was the false narrative that Laquan McDonald posed a mortal threat to the officers that night. I mean, clearly the videotape tells a completely different story, and yet we had the former FOP spokesperson, Pat Camden, who said and repeated this false narrative that Laquan McDonald lunged at the officers. And frankly, neither Gary or anybody else in the police department changed that narrative. They actually adopted it as the official party line that night. And so Gary could have stripped Jason Van Dyke on the spot. He absolutely always had that power. He wasn't constrained in doing that. Could have put him on desk duty, taken him off the street, as he could have done with any other officer once he saw those reports that they were false and that they were completely inconsistent with the dash cam video. He did not do that. And that's something he's going to have to give account for. I've heard him say what he said tonight, which is, I was powerless, the conspiracy was elsewhere, but he had a responsibility as superintendent of police to take the actions that he could take, and he didn't do that.
There's a certain psychology to voting in a runoff. When people go in the booth, they know they're going to get one more chance to vote. Do you think that that runs against establishment candidates? In other words, well, if they're around in the next round, maybe I'll vote for them. Does that benefit outsiders who aren't part of the...
You know, it's hard to say. We've not had a race like this before. We've never had a race with this many candidates, and frankly, this many potentially viable candidates, where you really have to do your homework and vote for change. Usually, it's the machine. Here's your choice. Vote for it or don't vote for it. So I think what's challenging people is really digging down and educating themselves about what the candidates stand for, what their vision is. So, you know, I'll offer a slight complaint with the media. The tendency is to cover the horse race. Who's saying this, who's throwing this barb. But really, what's important, and I hope this will be part of the coverage from here until Election Day, is who's got the bandwidth to be able to do this job. Third largest city in the country. There are few of us that are in this race that actually have the real experience and a proven track record of being able to take on the tough challenges and couple that with a real vision for how the city can operate in a fundamentally different way. I, of course, count myself in that race, and I think the difference for me is in a time where people are sick of the corruption, I'm the only person who's ever